You're listening to the ESP, the European Skeptics Podcast, an independent weekly show set out to bring you news, interesting topics and interviews with people mostly from Europe, building bridges and breaking down language barriers to show the world how active and awesome the skeptical movement is in the region. This is episode 525. I'm your host, András, and joining me for the show is you, dear listener. Sziasztok! Now, I think this requires a little bit of an explanation. It would have been a regular show with Pontus and myself, but unfortunately, Pontus had something that needed to be dealt with immediately, and it came last minute, so it was too short a time to get someone to sit in for him. So I'm afraid it's just my humble self with you today. But I promise I won't be here next week, as I'll be traveling in Turkey, which is the name that we have to call Turkey now. And since this will be the first time for me to do that tour, it's really stressful. So all my spare moments that I'm awake will be spent preparing for stuff that I have to explain or manage and stuff. So I'm really sorry, but I will not be with you next week. But Pontus will, and hopefully someone else that sits in for me. So this will be a somewhat regular episode, but irregular in the sense that I'll be delivering it all by myself. And before talking about anything else, I'd like to recommend an article published in the British magazine The Skeptic, which was written by an Italian marketing student, Allegra Bracchini. The piece is titled The Italian Electoral Abstention and the Self-Fulfilling Conspiracy Theory Plot. Now, the article talks about Italian electoral abstentionism and how it is fueled by a pervasive belief in conspiracy theories, which is somehow rooted in the superstitious tendencies of Italian society as a whole. But the unfortunate consequence seems to be that this abstentionism is eroding the country's democracy. This, as Allegra Bracchini puts it, becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy where citizens distrust the system so much that they abstain from dealing with politics and even practicing their democratic right to vote, which eventually leads to unrepresentative election results, which in turn further fuels people's disillusionment. The weakening of intermediary bodies and the rise of social media echo chambers exacerbate this issue, creating a vicious cycle of political disengagement. Allegra Bracchini goes into a lot more detail in the article, but I think it's such an important cautionary tale that you should read it, and obviously it will be included in the show notes. Alright, but with that out of the way, I'd like to turn to the segment that we call TWISH, which is This Week in Skeptical History. Okay, and this week I am commemorating someone who was born on the 30th of March in the year 1811, and his name was Robert Wilhelm Bunsen, and he was a German chemist, and his work helped transform science from something like educated guesswork into more of a precision tool for uncovering reality. Today, his name is synonymous with the Bunsen burner. But that iconic blue flame was never the end goal. It was a solution to a specific problem. Bunsen needed a clean, non-luminous flame to avoid meddling with his observations because he was pursuing something very ambitious in collaboration with Gustav Kirchhoff. They were trying to decode the information of the chemical composition of objects that were carried by light, either emitted by or bounced back from materials. Together, they pioneered spectroscopy, demonstrating that each chemical element emits and/or absorbs light at specific wavelengths, resulting in a unique spectral fingerprint of all of them. This wasn't just a laboratory curiosity, it basically collapsed a long-standing assumption that the composition of distant stars was fundamentally unknowable. But thanks to them, for the first time, scientists could analyze the chemistry of the cosmos from Earth, turning light into evidence. Their method quickly proved its power. Using spectroscopy, Bunsen and Kirchhoff discovered new elements including cesium and rubidium, not by isolating bulk substances of them, but by reading their spectral signatures. And that was unprecedented. Bunsen himself embodied rigorous skepticism in practice as well. Early in his career, an explosion during arsenic research caused him the sight in one eye. Yet he continued refining experimental methods, including safer laboratory techniques that are still in use today. He also went on to investigate Icelandic geysers, applying physics and careful observation to show they were natural hydrothermal systems and not something spewed out of the depth by mythical creatures that were so widely believed for hundreds of years. So he was a real skeptic in the modern sense as well, if not identifying as such, but still. But what defines Bunsen's legacy is not just what he discovered, but how he worked. So he insisted on precise instrumentation, repeatable experiments, and transparent methods. That is crucial for reproducibility of results. And those principles do underpin modern empirical science as well. And in doing all this and applying this approach, he helped establish a core skeptical idea that no question is beyond reach, provided we can build the tools to test it. And I think that is really cool that he came up with that and applied that approach to everything that he did. So the next time you see that steady blue laboratory flame powered by gas of the Bunsen burner, remember it wasn't just lighting experiments. It helped illuminate the composition of the universe itself. Yeah, those are big words, but it's really cool how they came up with all that. And his birthday was on the 30th of March. So let's celebrate him this week. But we do have a couple of news items as well, so why don't we talk about them too? Obviously, this would have been somehow shared with Pontus. We like to take turns. This is going to be weird for all our listeners that I'm going to be covering news one after the other, several of them, but let's crack on with it. So, in the UK, new data suggests that the British public is increasingly eager to separate church and state. This is based on a poll that was conducted by More in Common on behalf of the National Secular Society, and it was highlighted this week by Humanists UK. And it's good to see how the results reveal a significant mandate for secular reform that is long overdue. The findings show that Britons are now more than twice as likely to say religion plays too big a role in politics as they are to say it plays too small a role. And this sentiment seems to extend to the very structure of Parliament, where 2/3 of the public now oppose the automatic right of Anglican bishops to sit in the House of Lords. And of course, we mentioned that on several occasions on this podcast, and we do agree with that. The Anglican bishops should not have a place in the House of Lords. But it looks like the classroom isn't exempt from this kind of trend either. 6 in 10 respondents oppose state-funded schools selecting pupils based on faith, with a similar majority arguing that religious education should focus on a broad understanding of various worldviews rather than promoting a single faith. And I applaud that. So Humanists UK is calling the results a quote-unquote validation of their long-standing campaigns, urging policymakers to catch up with a public that seems ready to move past religious privilege in public life. So, here. Okay, let's have a look at what's new in the German-speaking world. Florian Aigner, whom we had an interview with on episode 396, is quite a familiar face in the European skeptical community. He's an Austrian physicist and science communicator, and we loved his talk at the European Skeptics Congress in Vienna a few years ago. And he has just released his latest book titled Die Wirklichkeit ist auch nicht wahr. I hope I didn't butcher this title too much, but the translation could be Reality Isn't True Either. And it was published by Brandstätter. Unfortunately, I haven't read the book and probably never will until it comes out in English as well. So I'm just reporting on what the German skeptical organization Skeptics has to say about it. But according to them, in this book, Aigner moves beyond simple particles and forces to explore the fascinating physics of our senses. He argues that while a physical world of facts exists independently of us, our human perception is not a mere flawed copy of that reality. Instead, He suggests that our mental models and societal perceptions are themselves a valid part of a larger reality that must be bridged with hard science. And the book has already sparked a lively debate among skeptics online, particularly regarding Aigner's use of Plato's allegory of the cave, if you remember that, to explain how our senses lie to us. While some critics argue this leans too far into social constructivism, Aigner maintains that understanding the link between physical particles and human experience is essential for how we construct truth as a society. So if you're looking to dive deep into the interface of quantum physics, photography, and the tricks of the human mind, Die Wirklichkeit ist auch, nicht wahr is out now. In German, of course, but I bet this is a pretty good read. Okay, now turning to an international story that hits close to home for anyone who values the scientific method and open inquiry. The 2026 Academic Freedom Index update has just been released, and the data is, to be frank, quite alarming. The index is based on research done by the Varieties of Democracy Institute and Friedrich Alexander Universität Institute of Political Science, and it tracks 5 key indicators, including institutional autonomy and campus integrity. The 2026 report confirms that academic freedom is not just under pressure in distant autocracies, which we would tend to believe, I think, it is actively eroding right here in Europe as well. So the latest findings show that globally, over the last decade, academic freedom has significantly declined in 50 countries, while only 9 have seen improvements. When it comes to Europe, despite the continent still hosting some of the world's top performers in terms of academic freedom, shout out to Czechia, Estonia and Belgium at the top of the list there, the overall trend looks to be downward still. In the last year alone, 15 out of 27 EU member states saw their academic freedom scores drop significantly. And there are a few troublemakers, but Hungary is not the only one. While it remains the poster child for institutional capture in the EU, well, we have talked about that a lot here, the report highlights some democracies seeming to be following the example. Greece and Finland are specifically flagged for recent downward changes. Well, when it comes to Finland, it does matter that they have long been scoring very high, and the decline doesn't seem to be huge either, but still, it is worth mentioning. Even the Netherlands, traditionally a frontrunner here, has slipped significantly. This is attributed to a mix of government budget cuts and a decline in campus integrity, which is often a polite way of saying that polarization and protests are making universities feel less like safe spaces for open debate, and there are taboos when it comes to different topics, and that doesn't really work towards academic freedom. The big takeaway this year is the focus on institutional autonomy. The researchers found a direct correlation. When the state starts messing with how universities are run, the individual freedom of scholars to research and teach follows suit almost immediately. And for our listeners in the US, unfortunately, there's a massive warning sign. The report notes a fast and steep drop in American academic freedom, falling 50% in some metrics, which is now being used as a comparative cautionary tale for European regulators, and we can only hope that this will be enough for those regulators in Europe to work out a good solution in the long run. As skeptics, we know that science can only flourish when evidence leads the way, not political mandates, and when scientific integrity suffers, the whole structure of reliable knowledge is at risk. So take a look at the full report, which you will find in the show notes. Definitely worth a read before your next faculty meeting or even protests on the street. Okay, but one more thing in the news rounds, and that one concerns Wikipedia. In a major move to protect the integrity of human-curated knowledge, the English version of Wikipedia has officially banned the use of large language models to generate or rewrite article content. Hey! So this decision was necessary because for a while now, the community of volunteers who edit Wikipedia has repeatedly expressed growing alarm over hallucinations of AI. We've talked about that issue a lot on this podcast. It's basically a tendency to invent facts and citations that look plausible but are entirely fabricated just to keep the conversation going. Editors noted that the sheer volume of low-quality AI slop was beginning to overwhelm their ability to verify information and maintain a neutral point of view, which is the core principle of the online encyclopedia. And that is very rightly so, and it is worth protecting. The new policy includes two narrow exceptions. Editors may still use AI to assist with translations between languages and for minor copy editing of their own human-written text. However, the burden of accuracy remains strictly on the human contributor, with the community reaffirming that while machines can process data, they lack the accountability and nuanced understanding required to maintain a reliable encyclopedia. And this is very important also because Wikipedia articles are routinely used by LLMs when we do searches with them. You've come across that for sure. I do have my questions as to how it will be determined whether AI was used in the process, but this is for the community to work out for themselves. And I certainly welcome the move of basically banning the use of LLMs. It should not be allowed. But that brings us to the end of the news round, which means that we are about to find out who's been really wrong or really right lately. And now, in Pontus' absence, it will be delivered by me, and I'd like to give out a Really Right award this week. We like mocking people for being really wrong too, but it always feels better to highlight people or organizations who do a lot to support reason and reality. So we all know that dealing with conspiracy theories isn't just an online headache. For local government employees, it can be a serious workplace hazard, and we have mentioned something that's called the Reichsbürger movement in Germany that is making rounds and gaining support. So the Hessian Ministry of the Interior in Germany has just released a fully updated 36-page guide titled Protection Against Reichsbürger and Selbstwehrwalter. And these are referring to those sovereign citizen types who claim the modern German state doesn't exist or it doesn't have jurisdiction over them. Now, this is a very practical approach. It's a guide that would be useful for the average citizen as well, but it's specifically aimed at government employees in particular to ways to deal with this nonsense in a sensible way. It provides personnel with specific rules for handling difficult face-to-face or phone encounters. It also addresses the increasing radicalization happening in social media and the way these groups are networking with other extremist platforms. And by giving civil servants the tools to stay safe and de-escalate these situations, potentially, the ministry is helping the front line of democracy hold its ground against the advent of disinformation. So, for providing a clear, fact-based roadmap to counter extremism, the Hessian Ministry of the Interior gets this week's Really Right award. And that brings us to the end of this week's episode, and that means that, obviously, a quote will be the way to say goodbye. Okay, you might end up accusing me of providing you a very German-heavy episode this week, but that's just the way how we manage to get news items. So if you feel like that and if you want to change that balance, please let us know about stuff that's going on in your country. Get in touch. Feel free to contact us on Facebook, on Instagram, Blue Sky, or Patreon, where you can support our work in other ways as well. But do let us know if we're missing something that's happening in your country of residence or origin. Yeah, German physicist Max Carl Ernst Ludwig Planck is the one whose quote I'd like to share with you this week. And the quote is, "The first and most important quality of all scientific ways of thinking must be the clear distinction between the outer object of observation and the subjective nature of the observer." I think it's quite a good one. I hope you agree, but whether that's the case or not, this has been your ESP experience. This has been episode 525. I'd like to thank you for tuning in. Please keep doing so. And until next week, when Pontus comes back, probably with a guest hosting with him, goodbye. Vislat. This has been your ESP experience. The show is produced and recorded by TheESP.eu. Join us again next time, but until then, please send your feedback and comments to info@TheESP.eu. We would also love to hear your ideas and suggestions regarding topics, and if you have any skeptical news from any European country, we're always eager to hear about them. If you have an upcoming local event or an organization to promote, please don't hesitate to let us know, as we are more than happy to help. All music in the program was written and performed by Keisha J. Gray and George Robb and is used with their permission. Please check out our webpage for show notes and archive material at theesp.eu. Follow us on Blue Sky at theesp.bsky.social. Like us on Facebook or support our work on patreon.com/theesp. And don't forget to spread the word by sharing our content with others.
I don't know how you can believe.
Okay, let's start again. Yeah, I mean TWISH. Okay. Selbstverwalter. Selbstwalt. No.